Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Catalyze Yourself. I am Gayatri, and today we are stepping into a conversation that takes us far beyond the individual, into the systems and into the cultures that we create together. We are exploring what it means to lead beyond the self. And up to now, much of our focus has been on how we strengthen our own integration, how our awareness, our inspiration, our regulation, and our expression, held in reflection, becomes the foundation for conscious leadership. But we know this, there's another layer, because leaders do not exist in isolation, because leadership does not stop with us. It ripples into cultures, into our surroundings, the teams, the families, and the communities that we are part of. And we've all seen this or experienced this somewhere along the way. We've seen where leadership is built around specific individuals. The leader whose presence is the glue, the parent whose energy holds that family together, that colleague everyone turns to because they carry the vision, the steadiness, and the clarity. And yes, while those individual leaders may be absolutely remarkable, they also carry a limitation. When they step away, the culture often collapses. What felt steady disappears. The culture shifts. What looked strong turns out to be fragile because it was tied to that one person's presence. This is the limitation of heroic leadership. It centers everything on one individual. And while it might look powerful, it is fragile and it does not last. Leading beyond the self asks a different question. How do we create systems, cultures that don't depend on us to survive? How do we embed patterns that remain steady even when we're not in the room? Because strength in leadership isn't proven by how much others lean on us while we are present. It is revealed in what continues when we are not around. And that's where today's conversation will take us. In our last episode, episode 27, we focused on intention that designs our legacy. And we explored how legacy shifts from being something accidental or inherited to something we intentionally design. We asked what patterns we want to have repeated, what choices at that fork reveal our values, and how ownership under pressure becomes part of the imprint we leave. And here's the additional truth that comes with it. Even when we design our legacy with intention, if it only lives within us, it can still fade. And this is where the fade test becomes real. If the practices we've modeled disappear the moment we are no longer present, then what we created wasn't legacy by design. It was dependency. And that is why the next question matters. How do we embed the patterns we've designed so they continue as culture, not just a memory? Because leading beyond the self is not just for organizations, it's for life. It's for families, it's for friendship, it's for communities, it's for any space where our presence shapes what others experience. And the truth is, none of us live in isolation. The choices we make, how we speak, how we listen, how we pause, how we hold our tension and stress is not just about us. They become part of the invisible suggestions others pick up from us. They become behaviors others can be inspired to emulate. When we lead beyond the self, we begin to recognize that our leadership is not measured just by the trust people place in us. We start seeing that it's also by the trust they feel in the spaces we leave behind, not by how much clarity we can personally provide, but by how much clarity the system itself carries when we are not in the room. And so here's a deeper invitation. Leading beyond the self is not just about some type of responsibility. It is truly about possibilities. It is about realizing we have the chance to design communities that are steadier, kinder, braver, and fully sustainable because of the integration we've chosen to live. And that is what makes this conversation worth having. Not because we need to be remembered, but because we want to leave behind spaces that can hold others, even when we are not there. When we think about leading beyond the self, it is just not about what we practice. It is about how the patterns of integration with which we live begin to shape the spaces that we are part of. And our integration can be a shared rhythm, something held by families, friendships, communities, organizations. And the SIRE model gives us a way to see how this can happen in a very simple way. Self-awareness, when we look at it collectively, looks like a group's willingness to acknowledge what is real, not just what is convenient. We've all seen this in families or teams that fall into the same cycles. It could be the cycles of stress and pressure, or it could be where everybody in a singular home comes home tired and every evening gets sharp instead of comfort and gentle. Until someone finally asks, why does this keep happening? And what is underneath it? And what can we do to change it? That moment of awareness starts changing the dynamic. A pause, even a small one, can shift the whole tone. When we look at self-inspiration collectively, it is about remembering the why that binds people together. Think about community efforts, a neighborhood project, a workplace initiative, a family decision. Setbacks always come. Energy can dip. When people reconnect to the bigger why, this is for our loved ones. This is about fairness. This is about what we value together. The atmosphere changes. Inspiration keeps the group steady long after an individual's motivation would have run out. Now let's look at self-regulation collectively. This is how the group holds steadiness for everyone together in solidarity when pressure rises. We've all seen this in rooms where it's absent. You will see when disagreement heats up quickly. We've heard loud voices, spiked emotions, disintegration of what is trying to be accomplished. But then when someone chooses to step in and model calm, so everyone can take a breath and come back to it once everybody's back in their center, what is happening is an experience that is a lot more regulated for the whole collective than one singular person. It regulated the culture and dynamic of that group. It showed everyone that conflict does not have to mean collapse. Now let's look at self-expression collectively, which is simply the practice of letting the truth live in an open, transparent, clear, and respectful way. We've all been in spaces where silence lingers because those within the group don't feel safe to speak honestly. And we've all felt what happens when the expression is reactive, sharp, defensive. or personal, and it closes the room down instead of opening it up. Self expression at its best is different. It's when someone says, here's what I see, here's what I feel, and I want to share it so we can move forward together. Not to accuse, not to attack, not to protect ego, but to keep the space honest. Aligned self expression sounds more like I can speak with honesty, transparency, and respect without aggression and without softening truth, which is what actually transforms culture because it models clarity and compassion together. When expression is compassionate and transparent, it teaches everybody that truth can be spoken without tearing connection. It shows that clarity and care can coexist, and that pattern repeated reshapes culture. And self reflection, collectively, is the habit of learning together instead of staying stuck separately. We've all seen the difference between groups that rush from one thing to the next and those that pause to ask, what worked here? What do we want to carry forward? That reflection turns any lessons or mistakes into feedback and wisdom, and it keeps growth alive. And it tells new people entering the space, this is who we are. When these elements are practiced, not just individually, but together, integration starts to breathe in the system itself, and you will feel the difference. We've all walked into spaces where this is alive, and you feel the energy of the people. People are steady, even in challenge. And we've also walked into spaces where it is absent, where urgency dominates, where silence is heavy, where trust is absent, where people seem consistently braced for something to go wrong, instead of being present in their best. The difference is not the brilliance of one leader. The difference is what has been embedded in the dynamics of that group. When leadership expands beyond the self, it stops being about one person carrying everything. It becomes something distributed, shared across many, embedded in patterns that no single individual owns. So often, when we think about continuity, we think in terms of succession as that one person who will replace me, who will carry my role when I step aside. Yes, titles and roles matter, but succession keeps leadership person dependent. It assumes continuity means putting another single figure at the center. But leading beyond the self reframes that. True success does not always require a successor. Success is when the culture itself can hold steady even when no one immediately steps into our shoes. We've seen examples of this in families where one person holds all the rituals, the meals, the stories, the traditions, and everything dissolves when they're no longer there. But when that meaning of those rituals are shared by everyone in the family, they continue naturally. It's not forced. It's not an obligation to that one person. It's not because it's the expectation of that one person. It is not to please that one person. The rhythm does not vanish because it was not dependent on a single person to carry it. In communities, the same pattern will show up. A cause that belongs to one charismatic founder struggles when that founder leaves. But when the purpose is owned by the group, that work keeps going. That cause thrives because it was embedded collectively. And in teams, we see this. If accountability or reflection only happens when one leader prompts it, then it disappears the moment the leader steps away. And when those practices are normalized, when pausing, checking in, and asking the why become group habits, patterns, they last, no matter who's in charge. This is the essence of leading beyond the self, building for resilience, not recognition, shifting from leadership, from heroic individuals to collective stewardship, designing so that leadership does not fade if there's no singular successor, because it has already been distributed into the system. A real measure of leadership is not just how much people need us while we are there. It is what continues when we are not. It is not whether someone can fill our shoes. It's whether the ground we've built can hold without us. That's what success without a successor looks like. That's where leadership truly begins to endure. Success without a successor does not mean that your leadership legacy disappears. It means that your leadership legacy expands. It becomes success with a collective, carried through shared ownership. Not one person holding the center, but many people carrying the responsibility together with equal passion and investment. And what makes that possible? What allows leadership to move from being so dependent on one person to being sustained by the collective? It comes down to two carriers when I look at it: practices and wisdom. If we think back to earlier episodes this season, we have already explored how much of what we do, whether on autopilot or with awareness, is what we've trained our nervous system and mind to do. Back in episode 15, Neuroscience of Change, we looked at how our brain and body form patterns that can either keep us stuck or help us adapt. And then in episode 16, Perceive with Clarity, we saw how perception and projection shape what we believe is even possible before we even act, before we even consider. And much later on in episode 26, recent past, where we went through breaking through our barriers, we explored how these old projection protection patterns can keep us safe, but it also keeps us small until we learn to discern what is truly a threat and what is simply discomfort. If you haven't had a chance to listen to any of these yet, or if you would like a refresher, I would invite you to go back to them, because all of those episodes laid groundwork and is what helps us see why practices matter so much here. Our practices are the visible actions that make integration tangible. They're not rigid rules. They're steady, repeatable ways of showing up that others begin to trust. And we've all encountered this in many different ways and contexts. Families who begin their day with gratitude, teams that pause before decisions so reaction does not overtake reflections, friendship where honesty is spoken with respect, so trust never goes to a guesswork and assumptions. These practices are simple, but they're consistent. And because they're consistent, they're repeatable, they become patterns others can step into, whether we are there or not there. And then we have wisdom, which is simply the meaning that lives beneath the practices. Practices are what people see. Wisdom is what these practices carry. It is the lesson people absorb when they notice. We don't rush here. Clarity matters more than urgency. Or we speak with respect even when we disagree. Dignity is never optional. Or we pause to reflect because growth matters more than pretending mistakes never happened. This kind of wisdom does not need to be written into manuals and slogans and catchphrases. It is lived, reinforced, and shared until it becomes an invisible anchor of a culture. When practices and wisdom come together, leadership no longer belongs to just one person. They may have begun with us, but once they embed, they belong to the group. And this is where leadership moves beyond memory of a single individual into the inheritance of a collective. Because when practices endure and wisdom is shared, leadership does not fade. It continues, it multiplies, it expands, it becomes something we carry together. Having said that, we must also recognize this. Practices and wisdom are what allow leadership to extend beyond the self, yes. However, they don't endure simply because they exist. They endure because there is ownership. Ownership is what transforms a practice from something we admire in someone else to something we adopt for ourselves. It is what turns wisdom from a lesson we've heard into a way of living that guides our own choices. We've all seen what happens when ownership is missing. A team has values written on the wall, but no one really lives them. A family has traditions that fade one moment after the person stops insisting. A community has rules, but no one takes responsibility for carrying their meaning forward. In each case, the practices exist, but they do not last because they haven't been owned collectively. And we've seen the opposite, spaces where ownership is shared, a workplace where reflection does not depend on one leader prompting it, because everyone asks, what did we learn? A circle of friends where honesty is not left to one brave voice, but where everyone knows transparency with respect is the norm. A family where gratitude is not just one person's ritual, something everyone joins in. That is what collective ownership looks like. It's not about one leader enforcing it, insisting on it, and penalizing if it is absent. It is about many people choosing. It is about patterns that become ours and not just theirs. This is the real power of leading beyond the self. Leadership does not fade when ownership is shared. It multiplies, it strengthens, it becomes resilient because everyone sees themselves as accountable for carrying it forward. And now, as we close today, I want to invite us to reflect. Let us ask ourselves, where in my life does leadership still depend too much on me? What practices or wisdom have I begun to model that others could carry when they are ready? And how might I invite a collective ownership so leadership does not fade when I'm not in the room? And in reality, when I'm not in the room, it grows stronger because it belongs to all of us. Leading beyond the self is not about stepping away from responsibility. It is about multiplying it. It is about recognizing that the leadership we've strengthened within ourselves, our awareness, our inspiration, our regulation, our expression, and our reflection can become something more personal. It can become collective. It can be carried through ownership. So, this is the deeper invitation to recognize leadership is not measured by how much people need us while we are there. Rather, it is being measured by what continues and even strengthens when we are not. This is what it means to lead beyond the self. And if you are leading your life, if you're a leader in an organization, and you find yourself being weighed down by the mantle of leadership, this is your invitation to consider how you can, by design, make leadership a collective, engaged activity. So leadership is not dependent on you, and the weight it will take off your shoulders is priceless. The strength you will regain in yourself will be priceless. And in our next episode, episode 29, consistency builds you. We will turn our attention back to the individual self, and we will explore how it is not just the breakthrough moments alone, but the consistent choices we return to day after day that shape who we become. Because consistency is what turns our presence into our transformation. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I am Gayatri, and I'm grateful for the time we've shared here. Until next time, keep noticing what continues, keep inviting shared ownership, and keep practicing leadership that lives beyond you.